Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Care Live. My name is Matt Scott, and now you could probably see me. I'm really excited to dive in and get started. And as you can see, I am joined by two very special guests who you'll meet in a second. But just as we get kicked off, I want to mention that this is a very special day for multiple reasons. One, I'm looking at Regina and Robert, two nonprofit superheroes. And so today is Giving Tuesday now. And so we'll make sure that you both have chances to plug any organizations that you're most passionate about. Secondly, it's my birthday. Thank you so much. Both. Okay. all the pointing, all the enthusiasm, much appreciated. And I think that's one reason that I thought of both of you. You're just two great guests with lots of energy, and especially as I shared Let's Care Live with my community, it's awesome to have you because you are two people who are just really, truly doing awesome work, people who could relate to my audience, which is a lot more of the young audience, and two people who I admire and like. So I'm glad that I could have you together. And I wish that we could replicate the moment that Robert first saw you, Regina, on here, because he was freaking out. And I know that there's a lot of there's a lot of rapport there, which I'm sure that we'll get into. But just as we get started, for anyone who is tuning in, I just want to encourage you to go to the link for Give Butter to donate. I'm hosting a fundraiser for both World Central Kitchen, where Robert is on the board, spoiler alert, and for Food Recovery Network, where Regina is executive director. And so if you want to support, just go to that link for Give Butter, donate, support. And by this time next week, I'll have donated to both of the organizations on your behalf. You're awesome. And in a second, you're going to hear from Regina and Robert, and you should probably support the amazing work that they're doing. But just as we get started, Robert, could you kick us off with just an introduction of who you are and what you're up to? And Regina, by the way, totally understood. I don't know if people saw that or not on the stream, but Regina has a new dog, so it might be in and out for a second. But Robert, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, dude, happy birthday, dude. I mean, I remember when I turned 21, I couldn't wait to get out and head to the bar. I'm sorry, it's COVID. You're stuck on your 21st birthday. I know you should be out there having a great time, breaking all those barriers you've been waiting throughout your teen years to get to. How old are you, dude?
I'm 20.
You look like you're 21.
I'm 28.
28. Oh, dude. No, I'm just busting on you a little bit, but you do have a baby face. Come on now, you know that.
Yeah.
But anyway, dude, it's funny. I'm honored to be on with you because I'm really a big fan. But I'm a big fan of Regina. I was advisor to the founders of Food Recovery Network, and Regina and I have been great friends for a long time prior to her going on the bowl, and I've been an advisor. So it's a great little kind of circle we have going here. But I've spent many, many years, like Regina, trying to figure out a way to make sure that food doesn't get wasted. And more importantly, that food is used to its full potential to, uplift, liberate, educate, employ, or do anything you can beyond just merely feed somebody. So I just got done with a full day. I'm activated a World Central Kitchen here at Santa Fe Community College, where students who are in the culinary program will be earning credits to their degree while they produce meals for the community during, it's not really COVID, as you well know, it's really the economic kind of tidal wave that's washed across so many communities. So we did about 1,700 meals today and activated our first food truck. So I was out in the kind of windswept corner of New Mexico in Edgewood, New Mexico, distributing meals off a food truck we activated today with the Street Food Institute out of Albuquerque. So again, a really kind of wild, complex day. But in the end, I'm sitting here with two people I admire, a beverage of my choice, and the great feeling that comes with knowing that neighbors have been fed.
Oh, I love that. And I think it's so powerful because in the, just as a follow-up question to that, I know in the context of COVID and just the current situation right now, I'm guessing it's a lot different than a lot of what you've experienced in your nonprofit career. But I'd just love to know, like, how does this compare with the things that you've seen in your career over the last 30 years or so in the nonprofit world?
Well, I think any of us who've been around for a while would, there is somewhat of a level of kind of like, I'll give you an example. Great colleagues out in LA couldn't get homeless people off the streets, decades of trying. Within 2 months, government's activated and getting people into hotel rooms. There's things that have happened faster and with more purpose, and most likely with more long-term impact than many of us have been able to do in decades of activism, policy work, whatever. So there is an interesting kind of a bright side to this. Is it's cut through a lot of the tape that hamstrung us. Oh, again, where's the money going to come from? People said forever, and then suddenly, trillions of dollars have been activated to make sure crops aren't wasted, make sure men and women who are homeless are fed. Again, there's so many things that are happening now that many of us, it was a dream, almost a kind of a wild fantasy. Maybe someday we can get government to see the need to house people or to make sure people have a decent meal. And I think one of the interesting side things coming out of this is I hope people also recognize that so many of the health issues that make people vulnerable to COVID, particularly in communities of color, is the food that's served in schools, the food that's available in their neighborhoods, or just the standard American diet. This could be a glorious moment to realize that, the best medicine is what you eat every day.
Yeah. And I think just before diving in too deep into that one thing I would just mention to anyone who's watching is to drop any questions in the chat. I see some already popping in, and then maybe we'll get to those later on. But just in general, I would love to shift over. And Regina, you're an incredible nonprofit leader in your own right, an incredible food system leader in your own right. Someone who I love to hear from. And so I would love if you could actually introduce yourself to anyone who's watching and just give context on what your work is with the Food Recovery Network, but also give context on how this current landscape is affecting your world.
Happy birthday, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for putting this together on your birthday. And I am just really honored to be part of this conversation with you and with Robert, whom I love you both so much, and I'm really excited for the conversation and our time together. So I have been part of Food Recovery Network as executive director for almost 5 years now, and the organization is about 9 years old. And as Robert mentioned earlier, he was such a shaper of this concept, as an advisor to the co-founders of Food Recovery Network. So what we do is we, at the FRN National Office, we work with college students all across the country to recover surplus food from their campus dining halls and surrounding food businesses. And they safely package up that food, and then they donate it locally to nonprofits that help their communities by feeding those people in need. And over the last couple of years, we've expanded that work to help support everyone else outside of higher education. So we help for-profit communities, schools, to also do the right thing with their surplus food through a program called Food Recovery Verified. And so it's an incredible, it's a movement. We think of ourselves as a movement. We are student driven. So this is the next generation of young people who are actively engaged in a few things. They're actively engaged in two-day, feeding the people around their communities that are in need. So it is, think about, impact, 180 degrees of impact. It is people who think it's wrong that there are so many people out there right now who are hungry, and I can do something about it. And then the other concept with our students is when we throw away all this amazing food, we're throwing away all the water it took to grow the food, to transport the food. We're throwing away all the love of the people who actually made the food. And I think in particular during this pandemic, again, to Robert's point, there's so many beautiful moments in such a difficult space that are coming to light because of the pandemic, including the people who are making our food and growing our food. Hopefully we can keep the light shined on all of these amazing people. But our students think, when we throw away all of this really great food, as I mentioned, it mostly goes into landfill. It's not necessarily composted, and there are really good systems that are growing and growing and growing, but for the most part, it goes into landfill. And when that happens, when the food breaks down in landfill, it causes environmental harms. It helps to attribute to greenhouse gas, it helps to attribute to our environment, our earth warming up. And so students are committed to changing behavior and supporting our food system in different points along the way to ensure that if there's extra food, we have steps in place to make sure that we know where we can bring that food all across the country.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, and something that I'm sure others who are watching are hearing a lot, especially from you in this case, is just how much you're talking about students and about young people and their role in this. And so it makes me wonder, do you see the role of young people just at this time, especially when it comes to the food space and the work that you're doing, like being different than the role of other people, of older people?
So that's a really great question. And I think, again, I keep referencing Robert because, he really is so threaded into the work of FRN, and having done this work, for decades and decades, I think Robert and I both believe that, having the voice and the work and the ideas of young people throughout any process makes it better. And so I do see the young people engaged with Food Recovery Network having a very important seat at the table, especially now because everything's topsy-turvy. Nobody knows what's left or right or up or down. And so this is a really ripe opportunity to seek out new ideas and to seek out different voices and perspectives. And if we could allow that to happen with the students within Food Recovery Network, I think we would all benefit, because there are thousands of them, thousands and thousands and thousands of students who are, to varying degrees, committed to recovering food and bringing it to where it needs to go to help their community. And all of those thousands of people are brains, they're rural, they're urban, they're suburban. They are engaged in every single major you could possibly think of. And so when Robert was talking about earlier about, the food that we're feeding people, food is medicine. We have lots of folks within Food Recovery Network who have changed their majors to think more about, if I'm going off to medical school, what are we feeding our communities? We've had people change their major to think more about sustainability, about quality control, engineering. How are we transporting food so that we're not wasting our resources by hauling? My uncle is a truck driver. So they're in another incredibly important job that is now being, people are being made more aware of this, that they're not just hauling an empty truck from, they went to point A to point B, now they have to go from point B to point A and they're just hauling an empty truck. People are just thinking about different systems so that we're not wasting our resources. And our students absolutely want to help with that, for sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Robert, any thoughts or reactions to that? Because I'd love to hear from you. You're someone who stands out to me in that, while Regina, you were one of really my first 10 interviews, and now it's been 100 plus through 180 degrees of impact and all of this Let's Care umbrella. Robert was one of the the later ones, later 2018, and you couldn't stop talking enough how important it was to have the youth voice at the table, and how important it was to have like people of color, have more underrepresented people at the table. But in particular, when it comes to youth, I'm wondering what you see that role being at this point from your perspective.
Well, it's interesting that very early in my career, and actually prior to open the DC Central Kitchen in 1988, I came up in the 60s. Obviously I'm very different age than you all. It was like the 50th anniversary of Kent State yesterday. And of course, in a week, it'll be the 50th anniversary of an often underreported but similar tragic death of students at Jackson State in Mississippi. And it's funny because the white kids getting killed is what got the press. A week and a half, kids of color in Jackson State got killed and no one really thought. I mean, and it's funny, man, not to sidebar so much, but I've always been intrigued how my generational elders reacted when it's like, fuck, they'll shoot us too. It was the first time white kids got shot, and this was daily life for people of color in America and still is. But it was a very interesting turning point because I think generationally, that's what you saw a lot of young people who were involved kind of pull back and kind of say, in effect, whoa, it was fun for a while, but then now it got real. But I was 10 years old and wide-eyed, and I chose my side, literally back then. But I was also hyper aware of the fact I was a white dude in America and that I was born with incredible confidence. I could walk into any room and never have any self-doubt. And people, when they talk about, what it means to have white privilege, they oftentimes thinks it means, cops don't stop me. Sure, yeah, but it's like, dude, deeper than that. Just fucking swagger. Just the idea that I can go anywhere and unquestioned. And that's a powerful fucking, pardon my language too, but I mean, that's powerful karma. So very early on, I became really committed to this idea of I could be a Trojan horse. I could open a door. I could hail a cab. I could do a lot of things that other people couldn't, and I was going to do it. So I've worked hard all my life to utilize my whiteness in a way that not only benefited my own businesses and everything, but truly, in effect, said my best role is to open a door for others who might not have that opportunity. So early on, though, I became fascinated by, I love systems and opportunity. And when I looked at the fact that probably one of the greatest social experiments in the history of the world, literally, and it's also one of the most unrecognized or unstudied or evaluated, is your entire generation, both of you all. 100 million of the most diverse, most technologically sophisticated, freest generation in the history of the world raised doing service. I mean, literally every single one of millennials did service to graduate school. That's one of the most, think about it, 100 million young people said, their generational elders said, go out into your community and make a difference. And, for many of my generation, parents, it was like, wow, they'll go out and they'll see how good they have it and come home and behave better. But dude, I think you all are like one of the great time bombs of all history, and that idea of, so once you recognize that's out there, my generation said, I'm going to go to the school and get the food. But I think, I looked and said, like, there's a kitchen in that school, and that school's full of kids who need service hours. Why should I stick to this old construct of saying they need service hours, come to me? Why not reverse the flow? So in 2001, we started a thing called campus kitchens. And the idea was, oh my God, let's actually activate the underutilized or closed kitchens on campus, and students can recycle food there. Now, I'm thrilled that after 18 years, that merged with Food Recovery Network. And now Regina is leading the broader movement forward. But the idea was, for me, a lot more kind of baked into it was, and I think Regina alluded to it, it's like, dude, you're going onto campus. And this is where medical students who get no nutritional training live. This is where engineering students, law students, imagine if instead of asking them to, help us feed the poor, which is kind of what we do, we could actually get their brains activated. And if we could expose them to things right outside their university walls. Regina will tell you, most people think, oh, it's a college campus, but probably 80% of urban college campuses, 1 block away, 2 block away, it's America. So if those students can get out there and start to have their eyes open, but also their brains activated, and saying, in effect, wait a second, I came to volunteer at Food Recovery Network, but I'm a law student, or I'm an architect, or I'm an engineering student, or I'm a nursing student. And if they can start to see how, for their generation, for your generation, I pray, philanthropy is not the check you write at the end of the year. It's how you live your life every day. And I think that's the doorway that food recovery opens, and these programs that activate students. It's not, I need your sinewy muscles of youth to come and tote the bale. It's like, dudes, it's the blue pill or the red pill, Neo, and I think we're saying there's only one pill, mofo, take it and see the world and then roar into it with all your brains. So anyway, I'm getting a little bit excited. It's your birthday, dude.
No, I love this. I think the thing that's powerful is just, and there was a lot really there, which is, I think one thing I love about these conversations is that they're so nuanced and there's so many different points. But the thing that resonates with me the most toward what you started out with really is just this thought around how more people from people who aren't typically represented in the social change space and how they could show up and be represented in that space. Like for me, my big passion with what really started as 180 Degrees of Impact, still continuing, but now even broader as Let's Care and now Let's Care Live, is how do we, I don't love the word empower, but how do we do what we can to better support and give opportunities or tools to people who are not represented in this space to then make the impact that they can make. And I think about a lot of my friends, whether they're like women, whether they're people of color, whether they're in the LGBTQ plus community or at the intersections. And something I wonder a lot about is how could we, like, really, especially for those, I'll say, underrepresented change makers, how could we like create more pathways for them to be celebrated? Because I spend a lot of time, like Regina knows, as someone who in Washington DC, but also traveled like to Bentonville, Arkansas with me for something that I was doing for work. Like those spaces aren't the most diverse spaces, and so my passion is bridging that gap of like two sides of the wall that I'm able to see. But I wonder from both of you how we could bridge that gap, or like what advice you even have for me as I turn 28 and think even more and more about how we could help people bridge that gap between not being represented and then ultimately being represented.
I have a couple of thoughts on that, and it's really funny because well, not funny, but I just had like an hours long conversation with one of my closest friends here in DC. His name is Josh Singer, and he does a lot of work for the community here. And we talk often about race and about white privilege, and he actually did a course for people of the community here around white privilege. And it was really eye-opening for a lot of people. And I think when I think about bridges, when I think about humans and, who do we spend a lot of our time with? And, a lot of times the people, they look kind of like us, or at least they kind of talk like we do, and we're not uncomfortable. And so when I think about bridges, I think about, who is that bridge for? And who are we making do the work? So if I think sometimes it's almost we're not fully conscious of the fact that we're asking people that we've otherized to do the work for us, to make us more comfortable so that we can be at the same table together. And I think that when you start to really try to let go of some of your privilege, which is something that I think, again, with Robert, you're saying like a lot of people just, they have their privilege, they walk around, they're not questioned. They also maybe don't necessarily think about it deliberately, intentionally every day in a way of like, how can I change this a little bit? And so I do think about who's doing the work to make true community, to make everyone feel like they do have a place at the table. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, I don't know if it's like one of these things where I just, was saying before we went on live, I just moved into a community where I am 1,000% an outsider. I have the same skin color of most of the people that live around me, but I am 1,000% an outsider. And I know that it's going to take a lot of time. I know that it's going to take a lot of me sort of showing that I am interested. And if I'm invited to that table, then, with alacrity, I will go. And so I just feel like to make these cultural shifts takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of work in ways that people aren't necessarily taught, and we don't necessarily seek it out because we're busy in our day-to-day lives, and we have meaningful friendships, and we have meaningful jobs if we're lucky. But there's a whole lot of other, maybe it's like sort of like that fifth, maybe this is the sixth, vital sign that doctors check for that maybe we don't necessarily talk about enough.
Yeah. Man, just to, I'm an older dude. And again, I've had many opportunities because of some of the many things I mentioned prior, and very much being right time, right place. And it's given me the opportunity to think, which is the rarest privilege in the nonprofit sector. It isn't, we're constantly chasing money. Just the ability to be like, okay, cool, that's covered. I can actually think about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, how I'm doing it. And that's led me to some really tough crossroads that has made me at times challenge, lovingly at first, impatiently, always, the broader construct of charity. So first and foremost, charity is based on the redemption of the giver when it should have been the liberation of the receiver. And that's first and foremost, that's its root. America at post-World War II economy produced insane wealth. And if you think about the nonprofit sector, it was pretty much dead white dudes' money given away by other white dudes to other white dudes. And their entire construct was never to replace the system or challenge the system in which that had created the problem. I mean, philanthropy is still based on the Rockefeller Carnegie model. And you still see, God bless them, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, for all their love, their still model is the Rockefeller model of make as much money as you can by any means necessary, and somewhere to the end of your life, give some of it back to offset the damage you did, making money by any means necessary. It's not designed to work. It's designed to placate. And then the second big truth is that the sector constantly, for the last 20 years, every conference, seminars, why aren't there more people of color in our industry? Because we're not allies. There's two, that when I was young, I met a dude who said to me, you have two choices in life. You can be an agent of the people or a tool of the man. And most nonprofits are tools of the man. And people of color don't see us as not necessarily revolutionary and throw a brick shit, but I mean, just true people who fundamentally want to change things. We're, with all love, I mean, I look at COVID, this is hardcore, dudes. I look at the majority of people who are going to be affected by COVID have been fed by food banks and pantries for the last 50 years. And no one stopped and said, do you all have a role? This charity that has pushed processed food down the hill to poor people and given each other prizes. I moved more weight last year than I did the year before. My food bank is more successful than it was because I gave away more pounds of food. Are we culpable for diabetes, hypertension, obesity amongst communities of color that we thought we were serving. So again, I think that the fundamental aspects, and I think finally, people are challenging some of the underpinnings of charity. And again, it's no disrespect. It's not as if people did it on purpose. You know, one last thing, and I'm sorry, I don't want to be too chatty, but it's also really important to understand that the explosion of charity that happened in the 1970s and 80s, where we really went from 60,000 charities, which were kind of like this constant through the 40s and the 50s. There was this kind of steady thing of museums, churches, YMCA's, that kind of stuff, Bowery missions. There was an explosion. It was, in my opinion, because my generation's of mothers in the 1970s, when the economy changed and people, the one income earner didn't cut anymore. A whole tens of thousands of white women went looking for work, and they were told by the dominant male culture, "Well, you've been a housewife or a mother. You have no skills. All you're really good at is nurturing. Go be a nurse, go be a teacher." But a whole bunch of them who had been activated by watching Cesar Chavez, Shirley Chisholm, Malcolm, all these people who'd sat on the sidelines and watched the environmental movement, the labor movement, the women's movement, civil rights movement, were like, fuck that. I want to make shit happen. And they started, all of a sudden, nonprofits just like opened up all over, but it was primarily white women. And they went to their husbands who ran the banks and all the foundations and said, give me money to do charity. This is where it got weird, man, because they turned around, the husbands in the foundation said, we'll give you grants, but never for political work, never for political activism or economic empowerment. As long as you feed poor people leftover food, we'll give you a grant, And then in turn, so in effect, the foundation said, we're never going to give you enough to be independent of us. You're going to have to come back every 6 months, every year, and we're going to keep you on this real short leash. And if you get out of place, if you push too hard, guess what? Boom, we'll cut the leash. Those women with love in their heart turned out and developed a nonprofit system that did the same thing to poor people. Come and get a little bit of food, be nice to us, say we're good, fill out our surveys. But this cascading kind of, what's the right word for it? Domination, subjugation. The nonprofit sector was built on this thing. And I think we had to fundamentally understand that we were on the right journey, but we just went down the wrong path. And there's never anything wrong with saying, you know what? It's like literally the metaphorical husband who won't listen to, I know this is sexist, but it's my generation. The long-suffering wife sitting in the passenger seat looking at the map saying, we're lost. And he's like, no, baby, we're not lost. I know where I'm going. It's like, there's nothing wrong with sometimes saying, you're right, I am lost. Let's look at the map and maybe we have to go back and start again. That's where I think that's where the nonprofit sector needs to do, what it needs to do.
Yeah, one thing just to kind of stop for a second and look back, you talked about some really interesting background in terms of the nonprofit sector and how it's evolved. Are there any resources or books that you would even recommend that people check out just to get to dive in and get even more context?
Well, what's the dude's name? The Indian dude with the cool ass hair. Do you know what I'm talking about? The dude, he's on TV all the time.
Oh, you're talking about Anand.
Yeah. That dude, to me, I'm mesmerized by him. But I honestly, he's taken, in my opinion, more about the kind of social economics of it. One thing that no one ever talks about, this is the feminized part of the American economy. 7 out of 10 nonprofits are led by, founded by, and driven by, via volunteerism, women. Mm-hmm. Yet we're the third biggest employer in America with $3 trillion in assets, $400 billion in annual revenue, 14 million employees, 70 million volunteers. Yet we've been told by the dominant male.com culture, you're not entitled to the same political rights as a for-profit company. All you can do is sit over here and do charity. You are not, we pick who is going to run for office. We give money to people we want to protect our interests. Your job is to do charity and literally follow the kind of the parade with the broom. There hasn't been a lot of articles written on that. In fact, I've probably written most of them, to be quite blunt. I mean, I've tried to be loving and understanding. But like I said, and I'm sorry to dominate. I apologize. It's such a white dude thing to do. In fact, why don't I stop for a second and let Regina, who is incredibly brilliant and just as erudite and deep thinking as I am, have some time. I apologize for being so verbal.
And one thing I think there's I have a kind of a natural segue over to you, Regina, on this. But one thing I just want to point out, and I just typed this in the chat, that the book by Anand, Winner Takes All, which I have somewhere lying around here at home, is a great book to check out. And so I would just encourage that, because I know a ton of people who picked it up and have definitely started to kind of understand the space. And the thing I think that's really complicated, and somewhere where I'd love for you to dive in, Regina, on top of anything else you want to say, of course, the floor is yours. But I would love to understand, like, how do people do things the right way? So when I was looking at just or when I was reading Winner Takes All, I think that it can be tough for someone to understand the difference between like philanthropy and the way that things have been versus social change, which is incredibly necessary and important, and doing it in a way that's actually effective, like Robert was talking about. And so I wonder, just with you, Regina, how do organizations do things the right way? How do you approach your work? What have you seen? Whatever you want to say will be gold to me, so I'm just going to listen.
Oh no, thank you, and Robert, I couldn't agree more. And I think, as somebody who I'm actively trying to ensure that FRN has the funding to keep our doors open so that we can keep supporting students all across the country. And we've never seen anything like this before. That's complete understatement. Many of us have been around when the financial crisis hit of 2008, 2009, and the repercussions of that. And, I will also say the Black community didn't recover from that, 12 years later. Much of the wealth of African-American families was wiped away during that time frame. But as were a lot of, and so that's another, side, since we were talking about systems. There's a book called Democracy in Black by Eddie Glauder Jr. that talks about that in great detail. But it's a system that we have established. It's still kind of like the who's first to get hired, who's first to get fired kind of situation. But during that time, back in the financial crisis, I saw a lot of nonprofits have to shutter their doors because they were living so much hand to mouth in the ways that Robert mentioned. And it is really hard to create a system outside of that we have foundations that receive their funding because of the profits of the corporate arm. And so FRN is definitely within that. And I will say, I do have meaningful relationships with our funders, but it is, year to year, here's a grant, you might not get it next year. And Robert and I have talked about this, the anxiety and the stress, pandemic aside, of trying to work within that system to make sure that you have enough funding to not only pay your staff, but to see the vision that you have of where things need to go. And that's just working with your mission, and our mission isn't financial change. We want to support and be allies to other organizations that are working on restructuring the financial system. I talk very candidly with my team about, where FRN first was with our budget to where it is now. And I've raised the salary of our fellowship, but it is nowhere near what I would want it to be. And I try to talk with my team about, why the fellowship pays what it pays, how we've been able to increase it. But a big part of the work that I did when I first started at FRN was to ensure that we had reserve.
Mhm.
Because, you know, we all know it was at some point, I mean, who knew it was going to be a pandemic? It could have been something else, that this was going to happen, like where funding might dry up or might become even more uncertain. And so I definitely recognize that, you know, we work within that system, and it is extremely difficult. Even if we are completely volunteer based, the work that we do, it does take money, and we don't create widgets. What we create are leaders, or, you know, leaders come to us, and it is their sandbox to get better at their leadership. And then they go on to amazing other places, you know, as FRN alums. So I myself feel the struggle. You know, I was listening to public radio earlier today, and somebody was saying, you know, if after all these jobs dry up, am I going to become a pandemic, you know, someone who's like checking people's temperature? Or is that the jobs that are going to be left? Is that all that's out there for me? Because I wasn't being overly respected in the first place. And to say this, that is a very important job to do, but I think broader point being, it is really scary times. There are a lot of structural changes that need to occur. And I also have to say, another really great book that took me 3 years to read it, that I just finished, that I think everyone should read, is called Off the Books. And it's about the underground marketplace of Southside Chicago in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it talks about, I think, another thing with bringing it back a little bit to the privilege, that people who maybe are in a certain economic standing, or again, whose table do you think that you're at, that oftentimes a lot of communities that we ignore, or we don't respect, or we just don't think about, it's not always nefarious, but have marketplaces that we don't even understand or comprehend, or we're not involved in that. And so when hard times hit, it takes a long time sometimes for it to hit the people that we are subjugating, for a lot of different reasons, you know, because we think we have to pay people a little bit of money so that we can have billions of dollars. You know, and I think the meatpacking industry right now is kind of feeling that, where all of their workers are saying, we had a lot of pride in feeding the country. We just want some masks. We just want separation. We're not asking for your billions of dollars, but I think you have a little bit to spare. And so again, I digress. I think there's just a lot. There's just a lot to. There's a lot of. Sometimes there's a lot of really good choices, but those choices are false choices, and we still have to work within them as other people are doing their work. And I always try to draw this diagram, and it never really works out, but it's always when I think about it in terms of different mechanisms going. And sometimes you have a really big wheel, and to really get that wheel moving, you have to start the smaller wheel.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how I think of FRN. That's how I think of, you know, the work that we're all doing here. You know, Matt, you're trying to inspire other people. That is cultural learning. You know, who's teaching people like the heart stuff? Yeah. You know, when I was in school, we learned a little bit of that, but No Child Left Behind, that kind of got left behind. So it's all interconnected.
Yeah, wow, and it's deep, and I think that, you know, it's no coincidence that you both digress or feel like you're digressing, because these are complex, really complex issues. Like something that I found, so last year, almost a year ago, back in June, I went to San Francisco with my friend Eric Dowds, who's a filmmaker, an adventure filmmaker, diabetes educator, and we did 21 interviews over 6 days in San Francisco. And, you know, sometimes when your brain just like, you get certain phrases caught in there. One of them for me was just that, like, there's a lot there. And I found that even since then, I've said the phrase, there's a lot there a ton just out of habit, because these issues are so complicated. And I think if there's like one thing that people take away watching this, it's how complicated and intertwined all of these issues are. They're complex problems. That's what people call them. And so they're not as simple as a one sentence or 1 minute response. And I think that that's something that I'm appreciating coming out of this. And also, just one reason I'd recommend people rewatch and also look at the books that you're recommending. But something else I would say, just as a reminder, and I keep thankfully, seeing notifications come through, is that if anyone wants to support amazing organizations that are doing powerful work, that are turning that little wheel or turning a slightly bigger wheel, with World Central Kitchen, with Food Recovery Network, I'll point out that you could donate to the Give Butter fundraiser right now, against Robert's will. It is actually, the way that I'll be donating is 50-50. Rather, it seems like he would want that to go to Food Recovery Network. But Robert, we're going to split it between the two organizations.
Don't forget DC Central Kitchen, man. They are rocking it out every day. Almost 8,000 meals a day. The original, the OG community kitchen in DC. My beloved colleagues there every day, man, 7 days a week. That kitchen's never closed. In 30 years, it's never closed. We've been open 7 days a week.
Yeah, and it's powerful. And one thing I love as someone who lives in DC, but also probably like a lot of people listening, a lot of my friends went to college in DC. I've had the benefit of volunteering thanks to George Washington University and one of the programs there at the kitchen. And so I think it's powerful that there are opportunities to get engaged. A lot of people I know, though, also don't always know where or how to get engaged. I think right now we're at a really complicated time, because the ways that we typically engage and volunteer and contribute our own superpowers as young people, to these efforts, it's just a lot different. And people often feel powerless. Like I feel like I have a way of doing something by being able to tell stories and talk with you two and amplify your voices in the process of like raising a little bit of money for two great organizations. But I also know a lot of people are really stressed and beaten down by the current situation, and kind of like, rather than focus on that, because that's everyone's day in and day out, I would love to hear from you, like what are some of those ways that people could become, as I like to say, real world superheroes, in their own lives and work. Like, what advice would you have for young people, whether they're 28 or 21, as Robert thought I was earlier on in the call, or whatever their age is? What advice do you two have for those young people, aka my peers, really?
So, please, Robert.
No, you, sister.
Thank you. I was just going to say, again, thinking about the privilege thing. So I would want to say, not everybody has immediate access to the internet. So, in terms of ways to be involved, I think a lot of things like Meetup have, virtual opportunities to lend your superpowers. And I would say definitely do that. I think there's a lot of still like online mentoring that you could sign up for and be part of. Sorry, the scratching at the door is my doggy. I'm trying to get in now. But I think also for people who maybe don't have that kind of access to internet, other ways to be involved is future thinking. When this pandemic is over, what are your dreams? How do you want to be involved now? Can you call somebody and talk about that? Do you have a business plan that you want to get some advice on? Can you write some stuff out? I scratch stuff all the time. My little circle here, You know, it doesn't even have to be words, but I think something that young people can do now that, you know, one of the reasons why people volunteer at FRN is because it gives them hope now for something that feels quite hopeless. And if you can just hold on to your hope now by drawing, by, again, connecting in some way, that's what we need you to do. We need you here today, and we need you here tomorrow, and thinking about how you can hold on to that hope. And I know it might sound cheesy, but a lot of people are really struggling because of they're not graduating. They don't know if they're gonna get a job. You know, and write it out, talk it out, and just try to take a deep breath and make that mental space for yourself if you can. That might not resonate with everybody. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Robert has to say. It's not an exhaustive list. And so if I have, you know, I just don't want to like offend people to be like, that sounds really easy, Regina, for me to do that. I'll just take a deep breath. Great.
Yeah.
You know, with respect and in gentleness, I offer a few things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll hand it over to you, Robert, for thoughts and advice that you have for the young people of today.
Well, you know, I'd almost say, you know, radicalize your empathy. You know, think about if you're sitting at home and you're saying, I can't take another day in this house. Remember, we have more people incarcerated in America than any other country. And think about solitary confinement and what that must be like for people who've been 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You know, if you think about, I'm going to go crazy in here, think about mental health in America. If you think, man, I can't believe I can't get a test, realize how many people have bad health care in America. You know, this is a moment to realize that there's a huge number of people for whom the way we're living right now is every day. You know, I don't know where my next paycheck's going to come from. I'm going to go crazy if I'm sitting here by myself, and just recognize that now, for the first time in a long time, we're all feeling pretty much the same. Whether you're in prison, there's a lot of people who've never even stepped foot in prison who feel the same way you do right now. This is a moment where we all can kind of, I think, have empathy for one another. But it's not enough just to care. I mean, this is where a moment where we should never forget what this feels like, to be afraid, to be unsure, and recognize that no one should have to be this way. Again, outside of a pandemic. And I think for too many people, we don't realize that this is everyday life. I mean, you know, it was funny after 9/11, a weird thing to bring up, but when, for all intents and purposes, the people who were at the Twin Towers had to sign up for benefits and were appalled by the questions they were asked. It's like, this is what signing up for food stamps feels like. No. So this is a moment where this empathetic moment, we should hold on to it and realize, man, this didn't feel good. And I didn't realize before what it must feel like to be in prison, or to have no power or no sense of future. So like I said, I think that idea of radicalized empathy is what I'd suggest people think about when they get out. It's like, I'm not going to sit still anymore and pretend I'm unaware that this is what many people have to go through every day.
I love that, and I think it's interesting to hear your two perspectives on this and kind of how they help shape a fuller picture of what it could look like for well, I'll say for us to get involved in different ways. And something that I've realized and really thought about is just how, you know, there are what I usually end up saying is that there are silver linings to just the situation that we're in the sense that there are people who, you know, this is a tough situation, and a lot of people are really building that resilience muscle. One book I'd recommend is Option B by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. You know, just because it goes into this from a perspective of, you know, someone who's out there a lot, who's not always talking about their grief and loss, but also recognizes their privilege in writing their story of how they're experiencing grief and loss, and talking from a professional perspective of how you could build that resilience muscle. So would recommend option B there. But the thing that I think is powerful is that we are all, we're building that muscle. We're also evolving along the way every single day. So a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, or even a month ago, of what our experience was with this pandemic and the impacts of it was a lot different than what it is now. And so I think it's so powerful that, we have to realize that we can do something. It might not be, me finding a vaccine, and that's not even where my passion, is, but, it might be doing something that somehow contributes to a solution in some way, or makes an impact. And just the other thing I'd point out is that, you two have experience doing this really big, reaching lots of audiences with your impact. But even just looking at Regina as an example and the chapters in your work, like every single student is making a difference. And it might come down to a certain number of pounds of food recovered, or it might just come down to like interacting with someone and changing their minds about food and how we interact with it, our relationship with it. But it's so important to think about how we can make that impact. And just as we kind of wrap up, I know, first of all, we could go on forever. I know that you two could go on forever. If even after we all log off, I'm sure that you two will be catching up, talking for hours, which I love, and I'm sure people would love to watch and tune in for. But I have to ask, because for Regina, this was almost 3 years ago. And for Robert, it was probably about a year and a half ago. But the question I love to end with is just, if your life were a book or documentary, what would the title be and why? Because it just gives a good sense of who you are, your why, and hopefully it gets people interested in tuning in to what you're doing after they log off of this. Regina, do you want to start?
Okay, yes, because I actually thought about this. I thought about the first time 3 years ago, and I was just like, mind went blank. I'm really bad at titling things. And my team at FRN, they know this. And like, you call it whatever you want to call it, but it's the thing that is the thing. Like, so, okay, if I wrote a book, I would call it, I Could Write a Book. Because I feel like, just thinking about the race gender experience, thinking about the nonprofit experience, thinking about the systems experience, I always say, man, I could write a book about that. And so that's what I think I would call my book.
Awesome, cool stuff. And it's funny because now I'm thinking like, oh, you definitely mentioned being bad at titling things the first time around. And I remember it was something about being a hybrid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Robert, what would your title be?
Relentless incrementalism. It is my business mantra. To your point, we oftentimes think impact is a vaccine. It's something, dude, it's just small, positive, relentless movement. It's this idea of, I was a kind person today. I smiled at someone. It's just that idea of everything adds up. When I was a kid, I'd go over to Robert Kennedy's grave over in Arlington Cemetery, who was a big deal in my life. I was 9 turning 10 when he was assassinated in LA, where I lived. But over there's a great quote, and I urge you as young people, seriously, when we're done, if you're of a mood, Google on the Day of Affirmation speech that Robert Kennedy gave in the University of Cape Town, South Africa, a year before he died, was murdered after Dr. King. But he said that famous line, every time somebody stands out and acts against injustice, they send forth a small ripple of hope and daring, and from a million corners, those ripples become waves that can wash down the mightiest walls of oppression. Something along, but that idea that's always stuck with me. It's the little ripples every day. So I just refer to it as relentless incrementalism because it's just kind of a groovy phrase. But that would be my, celebrate Celebrate every day. I did something good today. And that's all that matters. If everyone in the world just said, I'm going to try and do something decent, kind, noble, pure, real, honest, you know, the world would be so fucking cool.
Yeah, man, you know what? I think that it's powerful, and I'm so glad. You know, I feel good just being able to share more of your stories with people who might not have heard them either the first time, well, people who probably definitely didn't hear them the first time I shared them, but also people who, you know, might not have heard, you know, heard from you at all. And so thank you so much, both of you, Regina and Robert, for taking the time out and just chatting and for being here. And I hope that, you know, more people, as I continue to do Let's Care Live, more people, more change makers will be able to share their experiences, share their perspectives, because there are a lot of questions that we need to ask you that we don't always get the answers for. So I'm glad that we could kind of contribute a bigger picture of who you are, what you're doing. And I would encourage people to go back, if you really want, go all the way back to Regina a few years ago, back to Robert a year and a half ago, and just check these two out. And speaking of which, just as we're wrapping up, I'd love to just give you the chance to point people to any links they should check out, anywhere they should go. I know that it's still Giving Tuesday, hashtag Giving Tuesday now. So your organizations, all the different organizations you're involved with are still raising money. But yeah, I'd love to just have you share where people could find and follow you. Maybe, yeah, Regina.
People can follow Food Recovery Network on all of the social media handles, and it's at Food Recovery. So Twitter and Instagram, and then Facebook, it's at Food Recovery Network. And then I'm at Regina DM, if people want to follow me personally. And then just in terms of, I guess I've had my whole career in the nonprofit sector. There's so many that I absolutely love. But I will say I've been really narrowing in on supporting our journalists all across the country who are providing real information about a variety of topics, including the pandemic. And in particular, Democracy Now! Is a tried and true love of mine that I just can't get enough of. But I really will say, if you know, supporting your local radio stations so that we can keep up with our culture is really important among so many amazing nonprofits. But if you give today to an organization that makes you feel really good, that's just that ripple effect. So
yeah, and I'm just Robert Egger. I'm pretty much Facebook, Instagram, everything. And I'm with Regina, man. It's culture, it's music. You know, when I was a kid, we sang "Happy Birthday to You," and then came the Beatles, and suddenly it was like, you know, say it's your birthday, and then came Stevie. It's "Happy Birthday to You," you know. So music, dude, and I hope that was just a little subtle gateway to remind everybody that it is your birthday, brother. You are a shining light. No, dude, don't even try and shine that light back.
Thank you. I'll just say thank you. That's how you get it to stop.
Glorious human. Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you both for being here. This is really cool and something that I'm really happy to share. I'm just pulling it up to confirm. But so I set a $500 goal on Give Butter raising funds, and we just surpassed the goal, $523. So, and the good news is it will be open until Sunday. So if anyone else wants to donate, if anyone's watching after, awesome, donate, support. And yeah, this is really cool. And to your point, you know, Regina, what you were saying, people are able to support two organizations that they really care about and value and, you know, feel aligned with. And I think that's part of the point of this, that we could talk and people could get to know you, get to know what you're up to, and support. So thanks anyone who's watching for donating. I have to give a special shout out to my sister, Lindsay, who is in the chat on YouTube, and she is probably my biggest donor, but I haven't checked yet. And so thanks, Lindsay.
Baby sister.
Yeah. Oh, a big sister. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. It's nice to have a big sister who loves you.
Yeah, I'm the baby though. So, but I'm 28 now, so I guess not much more that much.
You're always gonna be Lindsay's baby brother.
Yeah.
Forever.
Thank you.
Gosh. Oh no, you're giving her too much ammo, and this after. But yeah, thanks you two for joining in, and this has been really awesome. But as I say at the end of each and every one of my interviews, keep impacting, keep doing what you're doing. Thanks again.
Life is good.
Awesome.